Welcome to Seymour from the Front Pew podcast, coming to you from the broadcast studio at Seymour First Baptist Church in Seymour, Tennessee, and featuring thoughts and discussions around loving God, loving others, making disciples, and living the life. I am your host, Tiger Brooks, and now, on to the podcast. Oh my goodness. We're back.
You didn't unmute us.
I'm not ready to unmute y'all yet. We are back.
I feel like I was in the doghouse there.
We are.
I had to talk, nothing came out. Leah really wishes she had one of those at home.
Yeah. The mute button.
The mute button.
It's handy. So we're back. We are in the studio with our little piglets. If you're watching on YouTube, somehow we've got, maybe we're sponsored now by Swaggerty Sausage. I don't know. We need to work on that.
Clark Barbecue.
Yeah, that's a great. So we're going to jump right into this topic today because we don't know where we're going to go with it and how long this might take. So we're going to dispense with the small talk. But let me just say this. What we're about to deal with is conflict, dealing with disagreement, dealing with disagreeable people sometimes. And I want to say at the outset that this is not aimed at any particular person or situation, but suffice it to say, I mean, any given day you can examine Facebook and some of the pages that you frequent and probably find some sort of conflict. It's everywhere. We live in a broken, fallen world, and we have it in our families. We have it between our spouses. We have it between our coworkers. We have it. There's conflict. And so we felt like we see a lot that's out there that's not very healthy. We see a lot out there that is not pleasing to God. And so we feel like it's a necessary thing to discuss, to at least remind folks, just to kind of raise a flag and say, hey, let's think about this. And if you are a person of faith, then I think clearly you want to know what God's word says about these things. And so we thought it would be beneficial for us to do a podcast based on that. Now, let me say again, none of us are sitting around this table holding ourselves out as examples of how to get this right, because we've all messed up.
Yep.
And we do it on a regular basis. But we do want to point to God's word and say, this is what this means. And this is what we need to emulate in our lives. And so with that, you can think about any number of things. I mean, there's been a lot of things in our own community recently that have raised the ire of many people. Like I said, it happens all the time. And it happens in every walk of life, in every sphere that you operate within.
Yeah, we're also going into a political season, or in a political
it's
season.
Just
where
right
I think
for it.
Where, again, I think this is wise for us to listen. And then, like as I'm sitting here, as you're talking this morning, I even think, is there a line that we need to delineate somewhere along the way between disagreeing with someone and conflict?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's almost as if we've gotten to the point where, if we disagree with someone, there is conflict. Well, there doesn't have to be. Like, we can disagree on something and not create conflict. And part of that is just our attitudes and our behaviors that we put around those opinions, rather than creating conflict. The values because of disagreement.
The values and the emphasis that you place on any given thing will depend on the level of conflict that you have in that. Right. And I think I'm going to reference this book. Okay. I'm showing it on YouTube. It's The Peacemaker by Ken Sande. And it's a very good tool for people who are in the ministry, but it's applicable to every person who is a believer and who wants to glorify God in the ways that they relate to one another. I want to share this definition. I think it goes to exactly what you're talking about, because he offers a definition of conflict. And it's simply this: a difference in opinion or purpose, which is disagreement, that frustrates someone's goals or desires. So we can disagree about stuff and it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's things you may like some other pizza than I do. Okay, that's fine. We can still get along.
Tennessee pizza hog wild.
It doesn't frustrate my desires or goals.
Toilet paper over or under?
Over.
That's right.
Over. Yeah.
No conflict here.
And all God's people said,
Amen.
And so I think that's a good opinion. When you understand that if you become frustrated by something, then by its very nature, conflict has arisen. And so what do we do with that? How do we deal with that? What is a healthy thing? You know, Austin raised the question just as we were going on air a minute ago. Okay, are we talking about saved people? Are we talking about conflict within the church body? Or are we talking about conflict outside the church body? And our answer was yes. But
there's a
difference. There's a different approach, and there's a different standard that we hold each other to within the church that we can't apply to people outside of the church. And I think that's a very good point to raise in this discussion. So let's just kind of throw it out there. I mean, what are your thoughts on this in terms of, let's take, for example, something that you've been in conflict with. How did you guys handle it? What was your approach? What would you have changed now looking back? And then we can look at some of these things and apply God's word to these situations. Let's throw something out there. Let's talk about some conflict.
So I would say I'll start.
About this.
Try not to get myself in trouble, but I've dealt with it worse and not well at home. It's been the harder place for me to deal with it, and so I try to be aware of that now and try to do better than I used to or whatever else. But that's where I do least well. And none of those, like, grammar is not working for me right now, but it's where I've struggled with it the most.
Yeah.
And I think maybe just I'll let my guard down. I'll leave emotions unchecked or whatever else there. And I think, again, when I go back and look at that, you know, it's probably a big regret because I should have handled that better and modeled that better or whatever else. And then I feel like several different times, Melody and I in our ministry have had examples of conflict stuff, difficult issues to deal with, where I feel like God has blessed us to be able to deal with it well. And then on the back end, we've seen him bless those types of things. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I would say the difference for me, if I think about the worst and the best, I think a lot of the difference in that is the time spent in prayer and the time spent just really seeking the Lord's wisdom and how to deal with it. And so I think that with that would the applicable principle would be, let's not act so hastily whenever a difference or a conflict arises. Mm-hmm. And whereas what I feel like our culture is, we disagree with someone, well, let's go see if everyone else disagrees with us. So whether that is talking to everybody else in the world or whether that is posting it out on social media or whatever it may be, is that seems to be just the natural outflow of what is going on. Let me vent my frustration so that it's affirmed, or whatever else. And so that's kind of a hard place for our culture and our world.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, I think that's maybe a good place just to kind of dive in just for a second, because I mean, when you have an issue with a person or an entity, you've been offended, there's a disagreement, you see wrong, and you feel as though it needs to be corrected. I think that decision that is made to either A, go to the offending party and deal with it, or B, tell everybody else except for the defending party. I think that's an issue that inside the church or outside the church, you have to make the right decision.
Yeah.
You have to understand biblically, yes, and I can run down the chapter and verse of the fact that you have to go to the person and deal with it before you go to everybody else and tell them about it. That just, not only is it logical, but it stands to the biblical test of what we're supposed to do. And so the ways that they respond that's where your difference will become apparent within the church and outside of the church. But I think that one of the things, so Ken in his book, he talks about the process of conflict resolution, and he breaks it down into 4 things. The first thing is glorify God. And I think that is the preeminent thing that comes to my mind when I get crossways with my wife or my daughter or someone in the church or one of you, which really hadn't happened a whole lot. The thing that I'm smacked with is the fact that I'm supposed to glorify God in all situations. The key verse there, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. Well, when you are at odds with somebody, you're not glorifying God.
Yeah.
And so you're immediately met with that. And that's the thing, that if a person that you have conflict with is outside the church, they don't have that standard. They have that standard. They just don't know that they have that standard, and there's nothing within them saying that. But
and even though that they don't, it does not take off the responsibility of us to still put that in place for us. And I think that's, if I look at those things, the frustrating thing watching from the outside are so many Christians that seem to think that we can just push that aside because the other side doesn't care.
Right.
Or whatever. Like, we don't have that right to not pay attention there.
Yeah.
And to say, well, they don't care, so I'm not going to care, or whatever else. And
I think that's in contrast to what is the natural first response, not usually to glorify God. The natural first response is to win this argument, to revenge, to get revenge of the wrong that I have perceived against myself.
And the thing is, at the end of the day, just the very talk of conflict, it really speaks to the very core of our issues as in our human existence, which is sin is basically conflict with God. You've come into conflict with God because of our sin. The name Satan means adversary. And so when you are adversarial and you want to hold on to your anger and you want to fan those flames, who are you glorifying? You're doing exactly what Satan wants you to do. And that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, because people don't want to hear that, because being mad at someone makes us feel good. We want to keep serving ourselves by stirring the pot. Anyway, I'm talking a whole lot. You had a point that you wanted to make.
I don't
earlier.
know. I don't know.
You don't know what you know?
I will say, you did say, just to kind of challenge what you said, if I'm at conflict, that I'm not glorifying God. That's not always true when it comes to brothers in Christ, because Paul and Barnabas went different ways. And I think there's a very, especially when you're talking about, there is a way to be in conflict and to still glorify God and say, hey, you and I don't agree on this. We're going to part ways. You can still be about your ministry. And I don't know, in my head, that's kind of how denominations work in my head, not to chase that money, but I don't agree with a lot of the other denominations. I don't agree with everything our denomination says, but I don't agree pretty heartily with some of the other denominations. But if they're still glorifying God, I'm not going to throw stones at that, and they can have their ministry and I can have my ministry. And I think a lot of times, especially in our close network, we can disagree and then let that become a schism. And maybe it does need to be a schism, but then you hold some kind of grudge against it. I think that there's a time where you go, okay, we'll both glorify God just in separate arenas.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, we see that in the book of Acts, right? We've been working
that's
through
what
that
I'm
on
saying,
Sunday
man.
morning, and what we see in the end is they dealt with it pretty well.
Yeah.
From what we see, we know that there was a resolution at the end, that they came back and enjoyed and supported one another, and through it, the gospel was advanced in more areas because they went in different directions, and so I think that is. I think you're exactly right. I think we can still disagree and work through conflict, and God still be glorified in all those things. But it does not come naturally or easily either.
No.
But is that would you say though that is the resolution that is bringing glorifying God in the midst of the conflict? And I do think we have to flesh out. I mean, it's hard to flesh this out because there's nuance, but difference in disagreement and conflict.
Correct.
That's your
There
point
may
is
be a
well
little
taken.
difference. Yeah.
Because I was saying, in light of the definition that I made,
Right.
when the disagreement elevates to frustration and conflict, that's not glorifying God. But when your disagreement leads to amicable resolution, that is. And I'm not. So
Right.
And I do think it matters.
I was being technically.
It's how we handle the conflict.
Yes.
Yeah, and
absolutely.
that's what
It's
I would.
honoring to God.
That's what I would say is, again, does it mean that every moment of the conflict we are honoring God? Probably not.
Right.
I mean, but if we can handle it well, even if the disagreement remains, even if we don't come to the same alignment, I think how we handle it can glorify God all the way through the process. And even if we make mistakes along that process, I mean, I think about one that happened here. I'm not going to go into it, but in the end, I mean, God was glorified, and I believe it was a key pivotal for us in moving forward early and all those types of things. But I made some mistakes in the process, and I had to go and apologize to the person that we were dealing with it. And I did that. I had gone to them privately. I went back privately, all of those types of things. But I didn't handle all of it well. But in the end, again, I think all the way through that process, it was handled well and rightly to the point where we could resolve, move forward, do those types of things. And it's not easy. We have to do things that aren't very natural whenever we do those things. Some of that is listening and apologizing and all of those types of things that we don't like in our, especially in our culture. I'm not sure any culture has ever liked those types of things, but our culture does
admitting
not.
wrong.
Ours does not do that well at all.
If anything, that conflict resolution, that apologizing should be teaching us the values that we should inherently have anyway.
Yeah.
It should.
We understand that we're supposed to be servants to each other. We're supposed to humble ourselves and put the needs of other people before ourselves. All these things, like, again, when we're talking about Christian brothers and sisters, that is inherent. You're still on just step one. I don't mean to. For me, I feel like in listening to what you kind of said, I don't know, 10 minutes ago, about not doing well at home, I feel like I kind of, in my head, conflict is three areas. One is with unbelievers, and one is with believers who are in my sphere, which I would say generally is my church, and then people who I know are believers but aren't necessarily in my sphere. And I think if I look back, what I've learned is that I think I've done the opposite in each one of those frequently as what I should have been doing. And those who are believers and in my sphere, especially when it came to not just I disagree with you about, what song it is we're singing or whatever, which is the one I generally get people throwing something at me. I give a lot of grace and have a lot of patience. And then with the unbelieving world, I tend to not have grace and not have patience. And then with believers who are not in my sphere, I have grace because they're a believer, but then I can just kind of write it off. And I think the biblical model is almost the opposite of that. Yeah. Have nothing but grace when it comes to the unbelieving world and the faceless man, as we're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. With those who are in my sphere, I got to hold their feet to the flame a little more than just saying, because I mean, in my history of, especially because it's hard to differentiate our job with our spiritual walk.
Yeah.
But my experience, especially not painting with broad strokes, but especially with older, hard-headed men in church who have very strong opinions about my job and me as a person. I've extended grace and said, well, that's just who they are. I'm just going to and that's not really what Paul describes for us in his letters in the New Testament. We are called to call them on that, and the model that we get in Matthew of going to them and then going at large, church discipline kind of thing like that. So I have shown too much grace, I think, to people who are doing detriment to the kingdom.
Yeah, to the body.
But I think I have not shown enough grace to the lost world. And that's what I've tried to teach, especially in the last, 4 or 5 years, is to really extend grace to a lost world. And then not so much to extend grace, you know what I'm saying? But I think it's our responsibility to hold our brothers and sisters accountable.
Yeah. I mean, this
that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm just sitting here listening a little bit of this, and all that comes to my mind is this is messy. You know, this
like
isn't
Lionel?
Yeah. It's not like, you know, I love those 3 categories, but as you're even talking about those 3 categories, like my mind goes to the family who has believers and non-believers, but yet family is almost its own little category. I mean, even you talk about Ken Sande, and he has a whole kind of separate book on this that's called Peacemaking for the Family. And so there's different nuances even within that. I mean, even kind of going back to what Corey said about, you know, sometimes I think that's where, I don't think he's alone in this. I think that's where we handle conflict the worst usually is in our families.
Yep.
And I think if, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, I've sat down with numerous couples walking through marriage issues, but also every couple that I've ever sat down with in premarital training, we have a whole session dedicated to conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if we're being honest, it probably is the hardest place in the family. And we've talked about it. I talk about it with them a lot. You know, why is it the hardest in the family? I think it speaks to our sinful nature the most. That in my family, when I do let my guard down, when you are seeing who I really am, it's easier for me to put on a face in church with the people that I'm working with, the people that I'm trying to minister to. And unfortunately, and this is wrong, and I'm so guilty of this myself, that when I come home, okay, now you're just sorry, you know, I've put on this face for all day. Now you get who I am. Well, that's not right. That's not right for my family. It's not right even in the way that I'm handling that, and in the way I approach that. What I'm ultimately saying is that, you know, the real me, so to speak, the sinful me, all right, it's just time for it to come out and play for a little while. And that's not right. And I think that's what we need to be careful with on so much of our conflict, no matter who it is with. That our conflict, if we're not careful, it reveals. I think it begins to reveal the underlying root, which is sin in my life, the prideful nature of who I am. You know, my desire to win over, be right, and I've seen over and over again. You know, I think it's hard for us to have this conversation in today's age without talking about social media.
Yeah.
Because I feel like social media I've seen it numerous places where someone will be like, you know, is this not the place for me to voice publicly? Well, when did it ever become okay to voice certain things publicly? In a public setting, from a world's perspective, maybe, but the biblical way of dealing with conflict and of handling certain things has never been to just air it out.
Right.
It's always been, we approach it from this standpoint. We approach it from individuals. We work up to eventually, there may be an element where it's not me blowing it out. It's a group of people saying, hey, this isn't right.
And I would hesitate to say that it would never be the place. But but I don't get what in our mind triggers us to think it's one of the first places we should ever go.
So I think
Yeah.
it's because
To have a conflict or for something to go wrong, even in a public setting, and then to think that our first reaction as believers should just be to put this out there is just, there's something amiss if that's where our thinking is going. Like, we need to put ourselves in check.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that, it goes back, we have built a culture based on, and I'm sure some sociologist could speak to it, but we have built a culture that is based on likes.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, goodness, the young people who live their life just to get the likes, you've got influencers. So when you have ingrained in people this post, whatever it is, even if it's just pictures of my food, I want other people to experience how good this is. And so by showing this picture and getting likes, it's like a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And so the same is true that when I feel wronged, I need someone else to feel that anger. I
And
can't
to affirm this
and
wrong.
affirm it. And so the first outlet is, because if you rewind, before social media, it's the same thing. It was just gossip.
Yeah.
You got wronged at the grocery store. You go home and immediately vent to your best friend or whoever. Now you just have a platform to do it where everybody can see
Hundreds of people.
and you don't. It does not enter our lexicon that, hey, maybe this is not, because we're just so wired to have someone else see and experience what I have experienced and affirm it.
I think there's also another negative on the back end of that. Okay, again, we're just going to throw out there food. All right, so we post our food, and you love sushi, and you post your sushi or whatever else, and then someone makes a comment. How in the world could you like sushi? I hate sushi. And it's like we are personally attacked because they don't like this same food, and we are devastated emotionally because someone doesn't like what I like, and I know that sounds like an over-exaggeration, but
I
really
felt that way
not.
when we ate lunch together this last week, and Jason did not like my food. I was very personally attacked.
Sorry.
And I hate to overemphasize that, but I really think that
Told you ahead of time.
those same things are going on. And in the middle of all of that there's an identity and a worth issue there that's going on that we are struggling with. And it again, I don't talk about any of these things as being an easy topic for us to discuss or to manage, but we cannot just settle for these surface, as believers especially. We cannot just settle for these types of things to be okay.
So can you say with very pointed accuracy, a believer should not post to social media first thing when incensed?
I think
First thing, yes.
Yes.
I would agree.
And I think that I would
So I
take
think
it a
that
little
that's
bit of a step further to say that it should be one of the last things ever.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I could make a case for it. Like, I don't know that I could come up with an example to where I would say this was okay.
Okay. So
Anyway,
I've been thinking about this for the last few minutes, actually, how to verbalize this. And I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm not saying this is it, but I think this may be closer to an answer to that, and we can discuss it. But I think if you have been personally and privately wronged by a person or an entity, then there is no place that you post that. You go and you deal with that situation. If you have been publicly wronged and other people have been in there with you, like let's say the city council makes a resolution that affects a whole swath of people, then I think that there may be a place at some level that you have to raise awareness for everybody to know this is what's going on and you need to know about this. I think that's the sphere. So it's like if multiple people are involved, then you can get multiple people involved in the resolution of it. If it's a private matter, then it never should see the light of day. And I think some of that is supported biblically. But that's the only open avenue, I think, for us to air our public grievances like that is when other people are involved and have been aggrieved as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. To me, and I get that. And I see that kind of that public forum aspect, but I guess my brain goes to, I've yet to see it work.
Yeah.
I think that's the part that I'm struggling with. And I think the reason for that is if I'm airing my grievances publicly when I'm there present, we're talking about a public setting where we're talking, there becomes conversation. And it's less likely for my words to be misunderstood, to be turned around. Man, you get on social media and words just people, just, it's not understood.
Well, and
oftentimes in the proper context and the proper way it's supposed to be. And all
there
it
is no sarcasm font yet.
No,
I mean, like,
there's not.
We need one.
It just tends to build this whole thing, and like I get it, and I know that people, at the end of the day, it comes down. A lot of times, social media comes down to I want to be heard. I want you to hear where I am, and I understand that. I get that, and but even I was trying to put myself in a setting where I've been publicly, and I've been in those where I feel like publicly I've been wronged, and there were other people around, and even in those spheres, a lot of times. I still felt like for me the best solution was sit back and let other people come to my defense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean it's hard. It's hard in so many of those areas. And I think you come back to the first point to what you're saying is, at the end of the day, is my reaction to conflict God honoring?
Right.
Is the way that I am approaching this, is the way that I am trying to handle the way I feel, the way I want people to know how I feel. Am I approaching this in such a way that is honoring to God? And
is
the
that my
no?
Yeah, and is that my desire in the result?
Yeah.
Is it a desire to be right, or is it a desire to honor God?
Well, and when you go social media route, you are opening up that anyone can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so anyone,
you're getting believers' opinions, non-believers.
non-lost. But you got all of a sudden, whatever this issue is, big, small, whatever it may be, now the world is watching. And what is it that we were told that we should be known by?
Yeah.
Love.
Right.
Our love for one another. So is the world watching, seeing that you are known by love?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I would also, I would go to say, there is a loving response and way to deal with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
That those are not we are not finding the examples and models of how to do that in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, not to say it could never be, but that it is just not what is the norm, or even it's not even the exception. It feels like it just is not being found there. And I guess for me, I would just say I don't do all of this well, but it has been my goal to try to get better at these things. And that's what I think is greatly needed with believers, is to try to be better at these things. For me, like I know for me, like even in bad situations where I've not done well, in the end, I've still got to take some type of time and evaluate where I've been, what I've done, and the result of my actions. And at the minimum, we all should be doing that as believers, to be able to try to, again, to bring honor to God in how we deal with those things. And so,
and I think too, this is maybe on the back end of it all, but so much of conflict resolution, conflict, if you will, kind of goes to the idea of, I think we have to speak about forgiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, is forgiveness, oftentimes I feel like forgiveness can come in a believer's heart before resolution has ever happened. But I think a lot of people feel like resolution has to happen before I can forgive you.
Right.
And that's not the biblical model.
Right.
Certainly.
And it's also, another wrong view of forgiveness, that somehow forgiveness is for the person that I'm forgiving,
Correct.
whenever it's really for us to, it's really
It's
for
me.
us.
Yeah.
And then two is, I would also say, someone said this, counselor or marriage, something somewhere along the way that always stuck with me, is that we live in a culture where we like to say, I'm sorry, but we don't necessarily like to ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that there is a difference there.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to be asking for forgiveness, not just simply saying I'm sorry. And so, especially, I would say, especially for those that are in our close places of care and love and influence, is that sometimes they need to hear us say, will you forgive me for making these mistakes?
Yeah.
And not just simply, I'm sorry for making you mad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for offending you, or I'm sorry I did this. Because there is a difference between those.
Yeah.
I think it'd be good. There's value in me sharing the rest.
Finishing your list.
Yeah, because it's speaking exactly what you're talking about. He calls it the 4 G's again. The first G was glorify God. Obviously, that's the overarching thing that we want to do. The second one, which is what you're talking about, is get the log out of your own eye. And Matthew 7:5 says, hypocrite, first take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. And that's basically just owning your stuff. I'm sorry for my part that I've played in this. Please forgive me for how I have offended you. And then you can get to maybe what the other person needs, the actions they need to take.
So I was going to say, with what you were saying, Corey, before you even brought that up, is what I learned. Well, conflict, it's just like anything discipline oriented, right? The harder it is, the more training you get. And so the better you're going to get at it. And not that any of us are great at it or anything, but what I think I learned in the biggest conflict I've ever had was learning this, that I've counseled several people that I woke up every day and consistently prayed Psalm 139, because Psalm 139 starts with, Lord, you've searched me and you know me, but it ends with, search me, O God, and know my heart, test me and know my concerns, see if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So, you cannot enter God-honoring conflict and try and find resolution with a brother or sister without starting with you.
Yeah.
You have to start. And that is very hard, especially if you think at the end of the day, I am 100% right, this other person is 100% wrong. They did something wrong. They have wronged me. They are wronging the body, whatever it may be. But you can't approach that until you have earnestly examined.
Take an inventory of your
right.
stuff.
Because if I go at this, even with one little hitch in my giddy up, I'm not going to be able to do it right.
Yeah.
So,
So glorify God, get the log out of your own eye. The third is gently restore. And I think that gets to resolution. It's based in Galatians 6:1. Brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you also won't be tempted. And so, that involves the fact that there's going to be a conscious effort toward reconciliation in the process of whatever this situation may be, and recognizing that even this would even come into play for a person that you're dealing with that's not a believer. If you're the spiritual person, we bear the responsibility of seeking that and extending that grace that you talked about. The third G, or the fourth G rather, is go and be reconciled. Matthew 5:24 talks about leaving your gift in front of the altar. First go, be reconciled with your brother and sister, and then come and offer your gift. So that's really the priority, I think, that's involved when God is saying, listen, if there is something wrong, then forget bringing your worship to me. You've got to go get that right before you can bring your heart to me. And that's a pretty steep hill to climb when you think about it.
Yeah. So this may be opening even a bigger can of worms, and I'm barely thinking about it. So I could be
Maybe setting up
a
part
little bit
two.
here. Maybe a little bit, but I'm when you're talking about that, my initial thought goes to there comes a day and age, there comes a time with a non-believer that we have to do what the scriptures say, shake the dust off your feet and move on.
Yeah.
And my initial thought was, we don't do that with believers, but at the same time, there's an element, is there not, of when we look at church discipline that if we go through this process with a believer and there's still no resolution, it's not the same as I shake the dust off my feet, move on, because I know they're not a believer. But there's church discipline ultimately comes to a point where we in a public setting, it's not me alone, but it is the church is looking at this individual and saying, if you have this and you're unwilling to repent, do you even have a relationship with Christ?
Sure.
I think that's a very unique and maybe even a harder conversation to have. That if we've gone through this, and I think this comes back to the fact that resolution has to be there. And for a non-believer, I think resolution sometimes for us is we walk away. Mm-hmm. For a believer, I have a hard time, and maybe I'm wrong in this, I have a hard time seeing that that we have not fixed this, we have not worked through this issue in some way, shape, or form. I can't walk away from that. There's at least got to be an element of where are we in this? And again, some of it depends on what the conflict is. It may be what that conflict is. If it's conflict of you sinning, that's a difference. Rather than a conflict of I believe this, you believe this, but we don't really know. I think there's a difference there, and I think that goes back to kind of denominational stuff sometimes, but I don't know. I think there's an element that just kind of rolls through my head a little bit with this of how we come to that resolution. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's different, but also hard.
Yeah, it is. I would say you also, again, there's a lot that can get muddled in the midst of all of that, and I don't try to provide a lot of answers, but you just described church planting for about 2 decades. I mean, that's where you had Unity Baptist Church down the road, and you had New Unity Baptist Church 2 miles away. Yeah. I mean,
First, Second Baptist,
all kinds of things like that. Yeah. And that's not to look back and judge and to say that all of it was wrong, but it's also not to say that all of it was right. Mm-hmm. I do think that there is a time where believers can resolve and split. I think we again, biblically, we see that. I do think that there's a lot of times where we see no resolve and split. Mm-hmm. I do think that sometimes we're talking about believers, and sometimes we're talking about believers and non-believers. Yeah. And to me, that it begins to get really muddled in those areas. And I don't think there's a way to add a lot of clarity except to say, let's commit to doing things right from my end.
Yeah.
So let me commit to doing things better, well, striving for that from my end. Mm-hmm. So.
Romans 12:18. Then I'll let you talk.
No, it's fine.
Romans 12:18, I think, speaks to this, and it says, if possible, as far as it depends on you live at peace with everyone. Mm-hmm. And so I think Paul stating that, the very statement implies that there is the possibility that you can't
work it out. Yep.
But as far as you are concerned as a believer, I think we bear the responsibility of forgiveness. We bear the responsibility of working toward reconciliation.
Yeah.
If the other person is just going to be stubborn and they're not going to pursue it, we can't control that.
Yep.
But insofar as it depends on us, we have the responsibility to do that. And that's the tension there may always remain. Mm-hmm. Scripture doesn't say that we have to be chained to people that we disagree with.
Yep.
It does mean that we have to be at peace with them. We have to extend forgiveness to them, but it doesn't mean that we have to remain in fellowship with them at all times.
Yeah.
So therein lies the art. There's the art and science to all of this, and how the Holy Spirit impacts our life and how it leads us up to and through resolution and reconciliation. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is, it may never truly resolve this side of heaven.
Yeah. All right.
I have a hard time. I'm having a hard time having this conversation and not reliving the things I've done right and the things I think I've done wrong.
Sure.
And separating this conversation from like personal experience. So, but I would say, I guess what I have told myself or tried to learn is that I don't know that when it comes to the believer, God honoring resolution, and I think you said it, but if I can say it a different way, does not necessarily have to be resolution with that brother.
Mm-hmm.
I think resolution with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
And yourself.
and yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and then so for my journey of whatever, and not to get too off in it, I did literally shake the dust off my feet and said,
Yeah.
Lord, this is yours, and I'm done.
I'm done. Yeah.
And it was a process. I think I shared even on a podcast before that at one point Becky Baker challenged me and said,
Mhm.
the Lord's not, if you see what the Lord's doing in your life and using you, but you're still holding on to this.
Yeah.
And imagine what he could do if you can let go.
Yeah.
And
Speaking
that was to forgiveness.
Yeah.
And that was a word I needed to hear, but I even told her, I said, I understand that, but
Not ready for
I'm
it.
not ready for it.
Yeah.
And so that process, but anyway, I'd say walking down that road, it's going to a point where you say, not only am I'm done and I'm walking away, I'm not, maybe you're on a journey of forgiveness, you're not there yet, but that you will come to a place where, again, if you're leaning on his power, not yours, to forgive and to move on, then you find resolution with the Lord that you've done the best. And then the next step beyond that is that you hope for that other person, for God to be glorified, despite, because we understand, like we know, that God works despite our screw-ups.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at our own lives and say, look, even in a week in and week out basis, God uses my gift of worship and my leading to lead others and to speak into their lives. Then I look back at parts of when there were seasons of my life where I was far from the Lord, but God still used those seasons to produce a harvest of righteousness at times in other people. God can also do that with other people.
Yeah.
Other believers, they don't like their screw-ups that you can see, even if you follow the biblical model and you call them before the church and then there is no resolution. The amazing thing about our God is that he can still use an unrepentant person to bring glory to his name somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the fallen preachers and all the people that were converted while they were doing terrible things on the side.
Yeah.
That is a tribute to God being able to accomplish his task through brokenness and through broken people. And so you can't discredit what God has done through broken people, even though they're still broken. Does that make sense? And so I think that's where, in my brain, resolution comes, is that it's a peace with the Lord that I am in conflict with this person or had conflict with this person and walked away. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think you have to have resolution with that person 100%. I think you in your heart have to find the forgiveness for that person, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be resolved.
Yeah. You have a resolution to the conflict.
And to the Lord.
In you,
to the Lord,
Yeah.
that the Lord will use the circumstance.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Which goes back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Glorifying God.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
The good news.
It's not easy.
Oh, absolutely. But like you say, the good news in all of this is at the no matter how hard the conflict is, no matter how entrenched people become, God is still sovereign and God is on the throne and he is above all of this. And there's nothing that some individual can do that will infringe upon God's will being done in any situation. And so I think that we rest in that truth. And I think that's all we can say about that.
And I think it's also conflict isn't sin. Reaction a lot of times to that conflict is sin because Jesus had conflict.
Be angry and yet do not sin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that I still am in conflict with Jason, that he did not like my food.
Chorizo is not for everybody.
No.
It should be.
It's true. I agree with you. All
I
right.
do like sushi. Even though y'all don't think I do.
I don't
I
like
do like sushi.
On
Certain
that
kinds
note,
of sushi.
on that note, before we get into more conflict about our food, thank you for listening. As always, if you found something of value here, share it with somebody. Subscribe to this so you may hear some future good substance that you may enlighten your life. If you have anything you'd like to share with us, you can always hit us back at the email you're about to hear. Thanks as always for listening, and say bye, fellas.
See y'all.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Seymour from the Front Pew. Our sole desire for this podcast is to glorify God by educating and encouraging His body. If you would like to learn more about anything you've heard today, feel free to reach out by email at staff@seymourfbc.org or by visiting our website at seymourfbc.org. If you're located near our community and do not have a church home, come worship with us at 10:15 a.m. on Sunday morning. Until then, we pray God's richest blessings on you and yours as you love God, love others, make disciples, and live the life.